Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name is Caitlin Cleveland, and I am the chair of the Standing Committee on Social Development and MLA for Cam Lake. I'd like to start off just by letting you know who's with us today. To my left, would you like to start, Emily McCoy?
Thank you. Katrina Knockleby, MLA for Great Slave.
Thank you very much. And MLA Semler, will you start us off for who's on the phone lines today?
Yes, MLA for Nuvik Twin Lakes.
Jackson Lafferty, MLA for Mulphy.
Rylan Johnson, MLA for Yellowknife North.
Thank you very much. On the phone lines today, we also have MLA Martselos, and we have MLA O'Reilly as well as MLA Simpson on the phone lines today. I'd also like to introduce our committee clerk, Mr. Jerry Burla, and our committee advisor, Ms. Erin Shea. And thank you very much for joining us. Ms. Schofield, would you like to introduce who is with you today on your side for the technical briefing on police services in the Northwest Territories? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kim Schofield, ADM Solicitor General for the Department of Justice. With me today is Jennifer Young, the Director of Policy and Planning, and Sherry Casey, the Director of Community Justice and Policing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schofield. And Mr. Jamie Zettler, would you like to introduce yourself and your colleague?
Sure, thank you very much. My name is Jamie Zettler. I'm the Commanding Officer of the Rcmp and G Division here in the Northwest Territories, and I have with me Superintendent Jeff Christie, the Criminal Operations Officer for the Northwest Territories G Division.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being with us here today. Ms. Schofield, would you like to start us off with your presentation?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So I thought we'd start off with the legislative authority that the NWT has for policing services. So the authority for policing is established by Section 18 of the Northwest Territories Act. The authority to have the RCMP as a service provider is established by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Agreement Act. The Minister of Justice, as the Solicitor General, is ultimately responsible for the provision of policing services in the Northwest Territories, including as it relates to the enforcement of the Criminal Code and territorial laws. As we have no police act in the NWT, we do not have the authority to establish a standalone police force in the NWT. As a result, the only police force that can provide services in the NWT is the RCMP. The GNWT is the only government in the NWT that can contract services with the RCMP. Unlike provincial municipalities, NWT municipalities do not pay directly for policing services. For example, the City of Yellowknife does not contract directly with Public Safety Canada for policing services and therefore do not contribute to the cost of policing. If this were to change, the agreement is municipalities with over 15,000 people as their population would have to pay 100% for policing services and all infrastructure, housing, and detachments. Next slide. Under contract to the GNWT, the RCMP are responsible for ensuring public safety and security to all communities in the Northwest Territories. They do this either through RCMP members who live in communities or by patrols from the nearest detachment. RCMP members are guided by the Federal RCMP Act and are federal employees. They also take police policy direction from senior management at the RCMP National Headquarters in Ottawa and G Division RCMP Headquarters in Yellowknife. They enforce federal laws, including the Criminal Code, the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, Firearms Act, and a host of other federal statutes. They also have the authority for enforcement of a number of territorial acts, including the Liquor Act and the Motor Vehicle Act, although they are not the only enforcement agency tasked with this enforcement. The Territorial Police Services Agreement provides that the Minister of Justice sets the objectives, priorities, and goals of the Territorial Police Service, provides appropriate resources, negotiates the Territorial Police Services Agreement, and ensures the independence of the RCMP in performing their duties. Next slide. Thank you. The Territorial Police Services Agreement is an agreement between the Public Safety Canada and the GNWT with the Rcmp as a service provider. It is a nationally negotiated 20-year agreement and was renegotiated in 2012 and will expire in 2023. The NWT pays 70% of operations and maintenance, and the federal government pays the other 30% of members designated as a Territorial Police Service. The federal government is responsible for 100% of costs associated with federal commercial crime, organized crime, and drug enforcement. The 2020-21 budget for the GNWT is $47 million. Considering the length of the agreement, there is a mechanism outlined in it that provides for reviews every 5 years. We are close to over our 8th fiscal year of the agreement and are preparing for the second 5-year review process. Provinces and territories and Public Safety Canada with the Rcmp will identify issues they would like raised during this process. The issues need to be significant in nature and not be of a bilateral issue. There has to be agreement of all the PTs to include the issue during the 5-year review in order to get it on the table for discussion. The first 5-year review resulted in no significant changes, but additional collaboration processes and procedures were implemented that were more administrative in nature, but improved the overall communication, included items with respect to how the Rcmp would raise new cost items and initiatives with provinces and territories and how they would be evaluated through the various committees. No significant issues have been raised to date for the next 5-year review. Rcmp members are guided by the Federal Rcmp Act and are federal employees. They also take, oh, I've already done that, sorry. Next slide. Some highlights to the NWT police force. We have more officers per capita than anywhere else in Canada. We have 4 officers for every 1,000 people, and the national average is 1 officer for every 1,000 people. Like other services in the NWT, policing services are more costly than in the provinces. The NWT has the 2nd highest cost per officer in Canada. There are 21 detachments in 33 communities with a total of 216 regular members positions and 42 public service positions. 9 positions are funded under the First Nations policing policy. There are also 17 federal member positions and several regional, 17 federal member positions, several regional administration positions located in Yellowknife, Winnipeg, and Edmonton. I will now pass it on to Commanding Officer Zettler.
Thank you, Ms. Schofield. Mr. Zettler.
Thank you very much. In G Division, the majority of the discussions between myself and the government goes through the ADM, seated next to me. These are scheduled through bi-weekly meetings, as well as regular messages and phone calls on a daily basis. The G Division Criminal Operations Officer and the Director of Policing and Community Services also engage in regular conversations on that. The Commanding Officer reports to the Commissioner of the Rcmp. However, Deputy Commissioner of K Division, Alberta, is my main point of contact to the Senior Executive Committee of the Rcmp. The Commanding Officer sits on the Senior Management Team of the Rcmp, which encompasses the Senior Executive Committee, Commanding Officers from each province and territories, and Director Generals of various business lines. The Senior Management Team has a weekly video conference in addition to meetings on a quarterly basis in person as well as required. Monthly calls with the Deputy Commissioner K Division occur as well. In the Northwest Territories, the Criminal Operations Officer is Superintendent Jeff Christie, who's with me. As well, we have a North District Officer, Inspector Dave Casey, who is responsible for 11 detachments. Inspector Dyson Smith is responsible for the Yellowknife Detachment, and Inspector Barry LaRock is the South District Officer, who is responsible for 9 detachments plus 2 silos. Next slide, please. Rcmp Community and Indigenous Relations, Recruitment and Training. This section outlines the RCMP's commitment to engaging with communities across the Northwest Territories. Key engagement levels exist across the territories. The senior management team traditionally engages with the federal and territory departments, local community members, and non-government organizations. District officers, district advisory NCOs engage with the regional, federal, and territory departments, community leaders, groups, and non-government organizations in the regions. Detachment employees engage with the local schools, community leaders and groups, and the local non-government organizations. Specifically on Indigenous engagements, I have a Commanding Officers Indigenous Consultation Committee. It features 9 representatives from various regions across NWT. The committee meets to provide strategic advice and cultural perspectives on matters pertaining to the delivery of respectful, quality policing to Indigenous peoples in the territories. This committee meets twice a year, but there can also be one-off calls to individual representatives as required. The co-chair of this committee also sits on Commissioner Lucky's National Indigenous Advisory Committee. Next slide, please. Community policing priorities and action plans. What works in one community doesn't necessarily work in all of them. Police work always starts at the community level. As such, detachment commanders and members are encouraged to develop strong relationships with local leadership so that policing priorities reflect local priorities. Because of what works in one community will not work in all. The focus is on unique community needs. Accordingly, every detachment policing priorities are expected to be established through the consultation with the community leaders and signed off by the local community leadership. This includes community action plans. The detachments and communities develop the community action plans in partnerships to enable them to work together to address these priorities. These action plans are multi-focused, including crime prevention, education, awareness, and enforcement at various levels. For example, this partnership is identified with the community's resources, what's available in the community, and where can they support us. Some examples are members engaged in coaching sporting teams, while in others they work in the schools and are involved in justice committees to move these activities forward. Support and collaboration is required. This is how we work together to ensure that our communities are supported, involved in the justice system, and that the responsibility behavior is a collaborative approach. Collaboration and coordination creates links between the RCMP and the communities, which are vital to our success. Each detachment has a dedicated restorative justice victim service liaison officer to work with the local committees. And while other officers do restorative justice work in victims, having members dedicated to that function gives us a specific contact for each detachment to work with the committees on issues that are local. Lastly, members are encouraged to consult and develop strong relationships with local leaders so they know what the community's needs are. This allows the Rcmp to make adjustments to our policing plans based on what is working in the community. Next slide, please. Public safety protocols. So the purpose of the public safety protocols, also referred to safety protocols, are to establish the trust and reciprocal relationship between Indigenous communities and the Rcmp. The goal of preventing situations, community crises, and to resolve disputes at the earliest possible opportunity. This is achieved by enhancing public and community and police officer safety and security, acknowledging and understanding that each party's roles and responsibilities are, participating mutually in conflict and crisis management process, establishing a meaningful foundation for the parties to cooperate in promoting, enabling local and regional organizations in the sharing of knowledge, information, and communication for the benefits of all the communities, and ensuring that each party possesses timely and accurate information. So far, we have assigned safety protocols with the Dene Nation, the Northwest Territories Métis Nation, and the Inuit Regional Corporation. Some of them have expired to date, and we're in the process of renewing those We are also in the preliminary stages of discussions to sign safety protocols with the Gwich'in Tribal Council and the North Slave Métis Alliance, and working through that process together to make sure that they meet both groups' needs. The basis of the protocols surrounds communications with the leaders in the communities. Whether there is a signed protocol or not, the Rcmp strives for this relationship with our communities. The protocols highlight that this is a bilateral relationship in the communities and identify each have a role to play. The processes have been beneficial in the development of cultural orientations and conflict resolution. The protocols have evolved over the years, and there's no doubt that they will continue to evolve as new processes are identified and working together. Next slide, please. Community engagement and cultural orientation. Serving communities is at the core of the Rcmp's emphasis on community policing, and as such, we encourage all of our detachments to engage in the community activities across the territories. This is an area that I believe G Division excels in better than any other division in Canada. I've spoken about this on several occasions as I relate the stories of our special constables, which, while hired for important duties, they also introduced our employees to the communities, which welcomed us and made us part of the communities. New members are encouraged to meet with local leaders, chief and councils, elders, in order to build strong relationships with communities they are serving. We talk about the cultural orientation on a regular basis. Just some key examples are Yellowknife Detachment employees, both regular members and public servants, have attended to cultural camps to gain experience of the Dene culture and history. In 2018, detachment commanders from across the territory participated in a cultural camp together. Blanket exercises were hosted to our employees in 2019, which include some of our community partnerships. The Rcmp has hosted and participated in events in communities to support local charities and causes ranging from regimental balls, law enforcement torch run events for Special Olympics, firewood raffles, sewing groups, seasonal food, and toy drives. In G Division, all Rcmp employees are required to take online Aboriginal First Nations awareness course to enhance their cultural awareness and understanding of cultural practices. Each detachment has a specific cultural orientation as well, and as members and employees transfer into those detachments, they are required to take them. These orientations are based on the local community cultures and practices and supported by the local community members. Again, these vary from location to location. Each detachment is required to have a reconciliation objective in their annual performance plan. The Rcmp has worked with families and communities to recognize this relationship with such events as the Special Constable exhibit and traveling exhibits, the raising of Special Constables, headstones, and cairns within the division. The Rcmp continues to renew and update our training surrounding cultural orientation. The senior management team, whether it be the district policing officers, the crops officer, or myself, attend to communities, meet and participate in events with local leaderships on a regular basis. Also, these are engaged through phone conversations as well as general meetings. Next slide. Thank you. Recruiting and training. Proactive recruitment within the Northwest Territories. Obviously, with the COVID-19 pandemic has had a significant impact on our recruiting participations. That has been identified in various programs due to cancellations of formal get-togethers. However, I want to highlight some of the work that has been done in the past and continues to be done at fulfilling the pandemic requirements. A lot of our recruiting events were previously done at career fairs and school visits. In 2019, there was 41 career presentations made across the 20 communities. In addition to 65 events, career fairs, school visits conducted. Obviously, due to the pandemic, those numbers have decreased because of the lack of face-to-face. However, we still are doing recruitment on one-to-one basis via virtual contact, and whether that is through phone calls or through Zoom, or other platforms. As of December 2020, there are 14 active applications with the RCMP in the Northwest Territories. Of those, 5 are Indigenous and 4 are females. G Division is also utilizes a dedicated Northern applicant analyst. This person is responsible for any Northern applicant. This allows them to assist in moving people through the various testing stages to be successful. G Division has identified several potential areas that we need to address, such as driver's licenses that can be an issue for candidates in smaller communities. As these issues arise, recruiters are identified and ways of supporting the applicants are worked through together to allow them to move forward. We also ensure that any Northern applicant has their application monitored on a regular basis for one-for-one counseling if required to help complete the paperwork. I would also like to identify the Occ Recruiting Initiative that we started a number of years ago. Operational Communication Centers recruiting has been a key for us. There has been lots of conversations I've had with our Indigenous leaders out there regarding the employees knowing the communities and languages. We made an effort to work with the employment officers in the communities to ensure that people that were interested would be able to apply to the process of being an OCC operator. Our hope is that we will be able to attract people that speak the Indigenous languages and know the communities. This process has been up and running for about 18 months now to 2 years. We've had 3 people that have started the process, but unfortunately to date, for various reasons, they have ended the process. We continue to be dedicated to recruiting in this area, and we look forward to having applicants apply. I will highlight that DEPL and COVID-19 has not been well for us. Obviously, with COVID-19, there was a requirement for sending troops home from DEPL. In 2020, 2021, we had planned on having 40 troops graduate. However, on March 18, DEPL was closed due to the COVID-19 restrictions and did not open up again until June 12th, with only 2 troops returning to continue the training at that stage. Since that time, we have been able to increase the number of troops in DEPL following the COVID protocols. However, we will not be graduating as many cadets as we had planned to or hoped to. So when we take a look at that, we will have a significant deficit in troop graduation. We continue to work moving forward for 2021, 2022 to bring DEPL up to speed with cadets again. Again, we'll have to wonder where that goes with COVID-19 as we move forward. I would like to highlight that we have taken efforts on the experienced police officer lateral opportunities. And I can say that, and that is police officers for another organization that wish to join the RCMP and carry on with their careers in policing with us. And I can say that in G Division, we have been successful in having one of those entries into our division here in Yellowknife. I'd also like to talk about G Division training. Mandatory and ongoing training outside of DEPL is extensive. Currently, we have about 32 online courses that require our employees to take at various stages. Some of the courses are once only, and others are on a yearly or bi-yearly basis. The courses range from operational skills maintenance to investigational courses, such as the trauma-informed approach, sexual assault, consent and law and common sense, cultural awareness, humility, bias awareness, crisis intervention, and de-escalation, as well as missing persons. Many of these courses are the result of reviews and inquiries that have taken place and new information being brought forward. Training is monitored on a regular basis for G Division employees, and I am proud to say that consistently we are leading the country in compliant rates. Again, COVID has had an impact on our local training as well, as it was closed from April 1st to about July 1st due to the isolation requirements and the Chief Public Health Officer's orders. However, I am going to be clear. Our employees in the Northwest Territories remain well trained, and we have been able to move forward on many of the operational skills maintenance requirements that are needed since July 1st. The members are well trained and equipped with all equipment that they need to do the jobs as per the national standards at this time. Next slide, please. Reconciliation in G Division. Pursuing reconciliation is especially important for the work that we do here in the Northwest Territories, as it builds up our ability to serve and meet the needs of the communities, resulting in better investigations, better partnerships, and safer communities. Accordingly, G Division Rcmp acknowledges the role that has played historically and is committed to pursuing the reconciliation in the territories. Ultimately, G Division's Road to Reconciliation Strategy goal is to foster an environment of trust, collaboration, and open communications with Indigenous citizens of the Northwest Territories, as well as acknowledge and understand past events which will help guide and shape the future of policing in the territories. We acknowledge that significant barriers exist in the pursuit of reconciliation for Rcmp and G Division. As this process is impacted by the legacy of lack of trust in the Rcmp, current actions of the Rcmp enforcing laws of the lands, and through ongoing events in other jurisdictions that have impacted our relationship with local communities. Ultimately, G Division remains committed to working with leaders and communities to move forward through these barriers and pursue our reconciliation strategy, which includes working with Indigenous groups and individuals to gain a better understanding of historical events and the impacts, exploring opportunities to understand reconciliation and what that means, identifying community reconciliation-based activities that will have meaningful impact, assessing the effectiveness of those activities and how can we do better. What are we doing in G Division? We have implemented the following pursuits of this goal. We require detachment commanders to reach out to diverse clients or representatives groups, creation of advisory committees at the detachment level, adoptions of detachment orientation guides, maintain training requirements for members, trauma-informed approach, missing persons, Aboriginal awareness courses, updated division missing persons policies, introduction of the Carol's blanket exercise, sought out and encouraged outer and cultural awareness visits, increased involvement in communities based on cultural activities such as Park and Mitten Workshop, the Moose High campaign in Wati, the CO's Indigenous Consultative Committee, the Special Constable projects, youth and cultural camps in Hay River. All reporting of the reconciliation activities form part of the APPs for the contract policing and COs, as well as our recently or soon to be published creation of our G Division reconciliation strategy. Next slide, please. Reconciliation and diversity. As part of the G Division's Road to Reconciliation, we recognize that in order to foster an environment of trust, collaboration, and open communications with our Indigenous citizens, it's important that we have police services that reflects the unique diversity and composition of the territory. As of April 1st, 2020, approximately 8% of our regular members serving in the Northwest Territories have self-identified as Indigenous. This is in line with the reporting from 2019. Additionally, reports show that 20% of our regular members working in the Northwest Territories identify as female. This is an increase of 75% since 2015. It is an acknowledgement that these statistics change on a regular basis and increase and decrease based on transfers of members in and out based on their career desires. Accountability and transparency. Public and internal trust is vital to the organization's success of the Rcmp in the territory. This requires RCMP employees to undertake and perform their duties and responsibilities with the highest level of integrity. Ethical leadership is a responsibility that rests with each of us every day in the performance of our duties, in the decisions we make, as well as how we treat one another and members of the public. Effective handling of complaints is a fundamental attribute of the ethical police service. The RCMP continually strives to be accountable and transparent. The RCMP continues to review our policies surrounding these areas, and we have seen an evolution occur on these policies. Certainly, government legislation, policies, and decisions continue to drive, as well as restrict some of these at times. In the Northwest Territories, there is no independent investigational agency as in other jurisdictions. However, this does not mean that the RCMP does not have oversight. The oversight comes in various different forms, such as courts, legislative processes, inquiries, inquests, civil processes, political debates, as well as the media. In 2011, the RCMP developed an internal policy for external reviews to fill the voids of the lack of an independent investigation agency within the jurisdiction. This policy has continued to evolve and will. In the Northwest Territories, the senior management team utilizes various processes at various times to be accountable and transparent. Next slide, please. One of them is public complaints. The Civilian Review and Complaints Commission of the RCMP, the CRCC, is an independent agency created by Parliament of Canada in 1998 to ensure complaints made about the on-duty conduct of RCMP officers are investigated fairly and impartially, if there are concerns regarding policing services. Where can you make these? Public complaints can be made at the local detachment, or they can be made online at the CRCC website. Who investigates these? Public complaints are generally investigated by a senior RCMP officer within G Division. However, there is a conflict of interest, then there is a particular serious and sensitive complaint. Referrals can be made to outside divisions for the investigations. Complaints can be resolved informally or via informal investigation. The RCMP strives to complete these investigations within 90 days of receipt of the complaint. In G Division, we've done pretty good on our timelines. On average, in 2019, public complaints were sat at 96 days outstanding. In 2020, they've moved up to 109 days. I like to think that's associated to the pandemic. The vast majority of complaints are resolved informally. I can add that the Northwest Territories has the highest amount of informal resolutions done across the country. If people are not satisfied with the results of an investigation, they can ask for an independent review by the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission. If requested, the CRC will review the investigation and decide if further investigation is required. The CRCC will provide the person who made the complaint with a report of their findings. The chair of the CRCC can also initiate public interest investigations based on information that the chair has received. These investigations are up to the CRC to investigate and complete. I will add that in 2019, we had 22 public complaints lodged. In 2020, we had 11. This is a small percentage of our contact with the public. 2019, we had about 25,000 complaints. In 2020, we had about 27,000 complaints. What else are we doing? We have internal file reviews that occur on a regular basis in relation to incidents in which investigational files are reviewed in comparison to the RCMP policies. Line Officer Crops and myself may or may not make these reviews public, depending on what they are in the public interest. Independent officer reviews. They clearly mandate a specific review to identify the root cause, if any, of an RCMP involvement in an event where potential to expose the organization or employees to significant civil, administration, or criminal liability. This also includes making recommendations to policy training and officer safety equipment. These can only be ordered by myself as well as the criminal operations officer. independent investigations by different divisions. Investigations into incidents by another RCMP division keeps it out of a small division and removes the conflict of interest. These are normally for more minor instances that may or may not lead to charges or conduct of our members. G Division also has many memorandums of understanding for external reviews. These are normally associated to criminal code allegations that are made of a serious nature and have potentially resulted in injury or death, or may be sensitive. These investigations are done by an outside agency from another province, and those reports are public by that agency based on the requirements of the MOU. They are independent from the RCMP, and I only receive a copy of the report. I have no input as to the report or how it's completed, and allows them to interact with other departments such as the public prosecution if required. How do we know that we're doing a good job and on track on this? We continue to look at various areas, such through external and internal surveys as other processes, as well as the high satisfaction level internally as well as externally compared to other police forces and nationally. We've seen a decrease in our public complaints files. And again, our use of force stats are posted online nationally with a small percentage of use of force associated to the number of contacts. Next slide, please. Policing small communities and meeting priorities. We understand that providing policing services to communities is always a topic of interest for communities in the territories and for the MLAs. Changes to the policing priorities in the past years have resulted in trying to provide better services to our small communities and ensure that the priorities are being addressed. Next slide. G Division operational models for communities. The RCMP and the GNWT are committed to providing quality and service delivery for communities that do not have an RCMP detachment in their respective communities. The operational model outlines targets for the detachments that provide these policing services. The targets include identifying policing needs and issues, identifying the policing needs and issues affecting their communities by open and regular communications between the detachment and the leadership of that community, enhancing the service delivery by working with communities to provide a model that works with their respective needs. Partnership focused. Partnerships have been established between the RCMP and members of the respective community leaderships to assist with policing service delivery. Again, this is locally focused and best practices are identified and shared amongst the district officers and detachment commanders. Community driven. Detachments in partnership with the community leaders identify and develop policing priorities for their communities and work together to develop the community action plans. Monthly reporting. Monthly reports are submitted to the community leaderships outlining the calls for service and identifying the work in the policing communities. Community policing activities, occurrences, and the number of patrols are identified. These reports are provided to the Department of Justice here in the territories. Next slide. Meeting priorities. All of the RCMP employees are aware of the Minister's priorities, and local APPs include initiatives to support these priorities. We do this by promoting confidence in policing services, implementing the reconciliation plan, out-hour orientation with detachment members, youth engagement, the signing off of annual performance plans and priorities and action plans by leaders of the communities, monthly reporting to the elected officials, engagement by the senior management, creating a positive social media presence to build on the strong relationship with local partners, adapting to changing enforcement and community policing landscapes. We are working with the NWT COVID Enforcement Unit, local governments to stop the spread of COVID-19 and maintain the community, the continuity of policing services. We are also continuing to prepare for locally for addressing impaired drivings, including drug impairments. The use of the dragger instrument for drug impaired driving investigations. prioritizing bootlegging investigations and ongoing drug trafficking projects via both the districts as well as the Federal Investigation Unit. Continuing to improve the response to the vulnerable population. Ongoing education of the detachments with regards to local justice committees to increase pre-charge diversions, SATE work, or the sexual assault review committee, thank you, work. We also attempt to respond to and support vulnerable populations through the use of warming shelters such as the sobering center, as opposed to lodging people in our cells, and providing training related to trauma-informed approach, cultural awareness programs, and applying to investigations and interactions with clients, and through reconciliation programs. Again, operational and physical innovations. We've recently partnered with the courts and the COVID enforcement team to meet operational needs and address financial impacts by using telebail processes through Project G Virtual. Currently, the COVID enforcement team is addressing files with our partnerships, and we have an outstanding working relationship with the COVID enforcement team to ensure that the Chief Public Health Officer's health orders are being followed, and we can support each program. So it is. Next slide, please. COVID-19 calls for service and impacts. While there have been fewer calls for service in the initial stages of the COVID-19 pandemic, the total volume of calls for service has been higher as each month carries on from 2019. This is suggesting the pandemic is leading to increased calls to service, particularly in the South District and Yellowknife districts. Of these calls, police are increasing being asked to assist in files related to social disorder offenses that do not necessarily involve criminal offenses being committed. Occurrence volumes have decreased in some areas, probably associated to residents not being out and about. The restrictions on store hours and occupancies may be contributing to fewer calls for thefts and shoplifting as being reported. It is likely that the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has led to increased calls for service related to family violence and domestics. However, we can't identify that yet. Next slide, please. So I just open it up now for any questions that anybody may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zettler, and thank you very much, Ms. Schofield. We really appreciate your time today and your presentation. I'd like to start off by going to MLA Johnson for questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Chief Superintendent Zettler and ADM Schofield for presenting today. Recently, Stats Canada released some statistics showing half of Northerners have been assaulted in their lives. We know that those numbers don't remotely line up with the number of assaults that have reported. BC and Yukon now have third-party reporting for sexual assaults, which has shown an increase in letting people come forward. It's been a number of years since we have said we would bring forward third-party reporting in the Northwest Territories NG division. Do we have a date for implementation on third-party reporting of sexual assaults? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, MLA Johnson. Ms. Schofield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We don't have a date right now. We are in the process of working with our stakeholders on establishing a process and a specific organization that would take on that work. And we have been working with our counterparts in the Yukon as they have rolled out their third party. Their numbers aren't huge, but we continue to monitor it, and we are working towards implementing that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schofield. Follow up, Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I would like ADM Schofield to come back to committee with some information on, what are the barriers, and, is there a funding aspect to this? What we really need to do so I can get some sort of action plan on third-party reporting. I also wanted to speak to recently the Supreme Court of Canada in the RV Zor decision came to a number of conclusions about bail conditions. Specifically, you know, a lot of the no alcohol conditions we put people on the north are just setting people up to fail. A lot of the curfew conditions are setting people up to fail. They you know, these over policing breaches really marginalizes poor people and Indigenous populations. And I think if you apply the Zora standard to the conditions that we've traditionally had in the Northwest Territories, the vast majority of our release conditions are too onerous. I know the PPSC has new guidelines, and we've been slowly seeing changes in bail conditions, but I think there's a huge disconnect that it hasn't made it to the ground in policing. A lot of our officers are still putting people on release conditions of no alcohol, which you can't put an alcoholic on a no alcohol condition. It's setting them up for failure, and it's the Supreme Court has given direction that it's no longer constitutional. So I was hoping Chief Superintendent Zettler can speak to how we are actually changing the RCMP's release conditions and the policing of breaches, because they're just taking up too much court time, and I think we've gotten way out of control with laying too many breach charges. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I think there's a two-part in there, one part for Ms. Schofield and then one part for Superintendent Zettler. Ms. Schofield, would you like to start?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The courts ultimately are responsible for laying those conditions when they're releasing somebody on bail. But I think we've seen especially during the pandemic, I think we've seen a shift in how that's playing out. We've seen a reduced number of people in our custody, a reduced number of people on remand. So I think it's having a positive effect on that. And I think we see more and more where if I'm reviewing some circumstances that might come to me, we see the conditions are more like you refrain from drinking in public so that you can only drink within your own house, and those are conditions because, as I agree with you, people that have chronic substance issues, it's difficult for them to live up to those conditions. It's alcoholism and is a disease, and it's difficult. So it ultimately puts them in a very difficult situation. But I see the courts, and there's been some changes on how they put some of those conditions on, so that the drinking may be able to happen within their own environment, but not outside their own environment. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll pass it to Commanding Officer Zettler to answer the rest of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Zettler. And maybe you can let me or teach me how I should address you today as well, please, because we've called you three different things. Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you. So I agree with you. I would suggest that, we have been clear that any release conditions should be for public safety. And that includes potential victims of offenses, and each case has to be looked at its own merits to ensure that the conditions of release are related to the offense. There are some requirements by law that we need to follow on some occasions. However, I think that the message that has certainly gone forth, specifically since the start of the pandemic, is the opportunity to release offenders within their communities that can support it, which has created a reduction of our transporting accused down to Yellowknife to have show cause hearings and doing it in person. Again, the conversations are being had by our investigators at the time of arrest with the Public Prosecution Service to ensure that any conditions are related to the offense and are something that are agreed and supported by the accused, keeping in mind the need for public safety.
Thank you very much, Commanding Officer Zettler. Thank you. The other part in MLA Johnson's question that he just wanted clarification on was just the issue around barriers or funding requirements for third-party reporting, and had requested potentially information coming back to committee on that, and I just wanted to verify if that was a commitment from your side or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we will come back to committee with a plan. At this point, I don't believe their barrier is funding. It's really determining at what point and where those third-party reporting connections would be, and working with our stakeholders for that delivery. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schofield, and we appreciate that commitment. Next on my list, I have MLA Semler.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, no, thank you. And thanks for the presentation. I have a couple of comments and just a couple of questions. First of all, the level of engagement with the mandatory online training and things like that, I'm glad to hear some of that stuff is going on. But I want to more speak to what was released in the news yesterday or today, the YWCA case study that was completed on emergency protection orders. And something that I guess that was mentioned is that, we haven't, due to COVID, but we also know statistically the Northwest Territories is one of the highest rates of family violence and domestic and violence again, in our territory per capita. And so when we look at the report that was released, and I'm not sure if either of the presenters have seen the report or have the details of the report, but one of the things of it that said that it provides little protection for victims, and especially when we have no Rcmp in some of these smaller communities, that raises alarms for me. And then we have even Rcmp officers quoting that, the abusers treat this as a joke, because those of us who've grown up here our whole life, we know, we've seen family violence, we've lived through family violence, and we know that you can go and you can do this, and it's taking up time. Is this a meaningful way, has the Rcmp and has Justice sat down and say, is this a way that we can protect our women, or is there a better way, and how can we do that? Thank you.
Thank you very much, MLA Semler. Ms. Schofield?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've just received a report as well, so we are working through it. We welcome, and we actually participated in the review. Our staff were part of individuals interviewed, and we see it as a good opportunity to take a look at the emergency protection orders and where we might need to make some changes. I think the report says there are some excellent advantages and good points to it, but there are, as we all know, in everything we do, there's always room for improvement. So I think we're going to take the report, take the recommendations, and try and figure out what would work best for the communities and the victims of family violence. It is only one tool that is available, so it, as lots of tools, some tools work better for certain people than other people. So I think it's a report that has actually highlighted for us where we might need to do some things different in some communities and for some of the victims of family violence, but it is but one tool. So we look forward to looking at the report, working with the stakeholders, and trying to, and as we see, there's multiple people involved in the EPO process, so the courts are involved as well as stakeholders and the Rcmp, so we need to work through the recommendations and find some solutions on how we can move forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schofield. Commanding Officer Zephyr, would you like to add to that?
Thank you, and I will second that. Just received the report today as well on this, so I have. So as the ADM had mentioned, I think this is a good opportunity to take a look at the EPO process, what's out there, and to see what we can do to fill some of the gaps that have been identified. I certainly, as you can see in the report, some of our employees participated in that report. And I think, you know, they gave their honest opinions as to where some of the gaps that they see, and we need to work on that aspect. It's like anything else. You know, we spoke previously about the bail conditions and making them appropriate. A piece of paper may not stop something from happening, but to date, it has stopped several things from happening. And there's reasons why those processes are in place. But they need to evolve and they need to be updated and modified as we move forward. And we will continue to work with our partners on that. So we will.
Thank you very much, Commanding Officer Zettler. MLA Summer, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, and as the ADM said, it is one tool, and I know that right now we're working on an NWT action plan for the MMIWG, which involves family violence. You know, and I'm sure a lot of the stuff that's said in this report will mirror some of the recommendations that are coming out of that came out of the MMIWG final report as well. But the one thing that I do want to say is, you know, we say here we have the emergency protection order, and then so where they're protecting people, but then it's also, we also hear, and that's what I keep saying, is we hear that even, and I guess I don't know how better way to say it, is that women's lives and families don't feel respected. I mean, the crime versus the time, the punishment, you know, and so that is also kind of, abusers look at that as a joke and say, you know, I'll get probation, or I'll get this, or I'll get that, and it, you know, and then till it leads to death, or, you know, in some cases. So and that's one of the comments that I wanted to make. But I also wanted to just ask on the community action plans as to where can we see copies of these, and who is engaged on these action plans in the community. Because I know you've also mentioned in your report that community engagement, meeting local leaders. I've been in leadership here now for a year, and I haven't met anybody or know how many people, how many Rcmp officers are in Inuvik, you know, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, MLA Semler. Commanding Officer Zettler.
Sure. Well, the community action plans and the monthly reporting plans go back to the local leadership in the community. Presented often at council, whether it be a mayor and council or band and council, and if a detachment has both, and presented both specifically to those communities. The action plan is prepared and reported on a quarterly basis back to, again, that local leadership group. There are the monthly policing reports that they receive that highlight the work that's been done in those between the community action plan as well as the APP. The document is provided to those communities monthly basis. Each month, we feed it up to the Department of Justice so that they have copies of those. The action plans, community action plans, engage not only the local government, but they also would include partner agencies that may have a stake on some of them, depending on what the resources are in that community.
Thank you very much, Commanding Officer Zettler. MLA Knockleby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just before we start, I wanted to say that Commanding Officer Zettler, I was very pleased to have your daughter as one of my Girl Guides for many years. So I'm excited that she's gone into the engineering profession, and we're going to get more women in there. So having been third, there's a few things that were already answered, I guess, of my questions. So I was very glad to hear that not only are you engaging with the communities, but you recognize that it's not a one-size-fits-all answer, and that each community has its own resources and needs, and they do need to be addressed, I think, individually individually versus as a blanket sort of policy. So I think that's great. I guess along that line, how do you track that? Do you have measurable targets for your engagement in communities? You spoke sort of extensively of what your members do. They volunteer, they get involved with the communities. But I have noticed over the years, if you don't really have sometimes like an actual goal that you're aiming for, it can kind of get lost in sort of a lip service type situation. So I'm just curious to know if you've got measures in place that you track how your officers are doing in the communities from an engagement perspective.
Thank you very much, MLA Knockleby. Commanding Officer Zettler.
Thank you very much. So yes, we do. We track that. Again, I talk about the APP, the Annual Performance Plan for each detachment. In there, they talk about their engagement in the communities, and they report that. We also, in the community action plans, are documented in there. Reconciliation, those activities are tracked in there. We report off into NHQ in Ottawa as well on many of the work that we're doing. So we do. Again, when we talk about some of the functions, whether it be the Moose Hide campaign that was in Wati or the sewing up in Polituck, those things are documented and are included into those programs. I will be honest, I think that there's places that some of our detachments could probably spend the whole day recording what they do and in their engagement. And again, that is based on detachment size and their availability and whatnot. Yellowknife, prime example of the work that many of the members on the detachment do in the school. We have a group that pre-COVID was going into the secondary schools and doing working out with the kids as part of a fitness group and stuff. And again, you know, I can look at what occurred over the holiday season with regards to the food hampers and toy drives and stuff like that. That's all documented, and I'll give a plug into our social media site as well. We've been able to get up on social media. That has allowed us to demonstrate some of those activities better than going out to the traditional media thing, because we can put photos on it and whatnot. So.
Thank you very much, Commanding Officer Zettler. MLA Knockleby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. All excellent. I'm really glad to hear that. I'm definitely going to start following your page and looking at your stuff, so that's great. I guess I just want to touch a little bit on your female representation, and I guess extend that just to diversity and inclusion in general. Being a woman in engineering, it's really near and dear to my heart, and I know the RCMP has had issues with female members not feeling supported, etc. You know, it's been a traditionally very male-dominated profession, so I get that, and it's going to take time for that to work its way out. However, I guess my question would be around, what do you have in place to support your female members outside of just maybe the regular stuff? Is there opportunities for them to have like peer group meetings or counseling, or in particular I think about maybe members going into smaller communities. I imagine that must be fairly difficult for a woman, and I know a lot of the officers do come up from the south, so again, another whole new experience to be in a very, very small community of only 100 people. So just maybe a little bit more on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, MLA Knockleby. Commanding Officer Zettler.
Thank you very much. So great question, and you know, I will say without doubt, it's well documented some of the struggles that the RCMP has had in the past on that. So we're changing as part of our Vision 150, our culture, and we've got it's out on there's a Vision 150 tracker on our national webpage that identifies some of the work that's being done in processes. Here within the territory, we continue to try to support our female employees at various levels. You know, we did a female-only recruiting initiative at one stage in a session and stuff. Our female employees have some informal support groups that they work together on to address some of those needs and stuff. But it's a struggle that we have across on various reasons, because we don't have some of the infrastructures out in the communities that we're allowed to utilize whether it be on some social media platforms or online platforms and stuff. It's really making that recognition as to trying to support people and provide them with the support that they need. And again, not everyone needs the same supports or wants the same support, so it's a trick, and trying to accommodate those things has been an issue. We do have a diversity process that has started and rolling out, and one of our members sit on the national Inclusiveness, Equity and Diversity Committee that has started recently on the national level. So that's an example. We have what's known as a Divisional Gender Harassment Advisory Committee that I'm the co-chair with, and have representatives across the division sitting on that. Now that includes the whole gamut, not only female employees, but other the employment equity groups and stuff on that. So.
Thank you very much, Commanding Officer Zettler. And we'll go to the phone lines now to MLA Martselos from Fort Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to address Commander Zettler on a couple of things. The first thing is there seems to be there are some communication gaps within communities, and there's a couple things that I want to talk about. One of them is the whole systemic racism file. No one's addressed that, really, except you made a few comments in your remarks. How is the G Division addressing systemic racism with the Indigenous file in the Northwest Territories?
Thank you very much, MLA Martselos. Commanding Officer Zettler.
So thank you very much for the question there. So certainly systemic racism is something that we're coming to a clear understanding as some of the barriers that have occurred. Again, as I talk about some of the cultural orientation aspects and working with some of our Indigenous partnerships and leaders in the communities, trying to understand and better work on what some of the barriers are and how some of those things have, some of our actions in the past have created some of those barriers. I talked briefly about some of the recruitment processes with regards to barriers for people from the Northwest Territories in getting, whether it be driver's licenses, stuff. Our recruitment process goes through continual reviews and evolves on that. Certainly the systemic racism aspect has been flagged, and that portion is going through. We also have to take a look at some of our other practices that have occurred, and I think that one of the other questions was related to the breaches and lodging or arresting, detaining, lodging people on breaches. And again, we have to take a look at that process and try to address some of those barriers that have caused, that have impacted some of our Indigenous citizens and whatnot. The ongoing discussion points as we move forward and try to take a look at our internal policies, we need to work with some of our partners to identify whether the policies are working and not, while at the same time maintaining that some of the legislative requirements that we have are in place. But we need to take a look at those processes. There's not going to be a simple answer to move some of these things forward in a very quick manner, but it's that open dialogue that we have with our Indigenous communities and leaderships to identify some of those.
Thank you very much, Commanding Officer Zettler. MLA Martselos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I want to go back to the community level with the Community Action Plan. As you know, I was a chief also in my previous work, And we always put priorities forward, and I was there for like 12 years, and then it was always the same priorities, and some of those actions for the community of Fort Smith has not taken place. The drug trade around Fort Smith seems to be flourishing. I don't think that there's a lot of visibility with the Rcmp in Fort Smith. That was one of the main concerns from the community when I talked to a lot of people in the community. Those are a couple of things, and I think communication is a major gap. I think communication is extremely important. There has to be a way to communicate. I don't know. I don't think you have a clerk that actually answers the phone, and we always have to go through the Yellowknife group now, and we used to have a clerk at the local level. Is there a reason why we don't have that here in Fort Smith anymore?
Thank you very much, MLA Martselos. Commanding Officer Zettler.
So I'm going to agree with you that communications is something that I don't think anybody will ever find the right level on. The more we communicate, I think sometimes we develop a high level expectations always and stuff. And it's something that we're always going to have to strive to work on. So I agree with you that communication gaps will probably always exist. So they will. But we need to continue working on that, and that's a comment that I make on a regular time. Communications. If we hit, if there's ever anything that goes off the rails, it's because there wasn't enough communications. And even when we think we are communicating enough, we find that somewhere along the line, what we thought was communicated wasn't communicated in the proper way, or was misinterpreted, and wasn't an opportunity to have that full discussion. So again, I'm committed to continuing on trying to work on communications, and I know every time that I come to this standing committee, or any time that I meet with a community leader, it's about communications, and it will always be about communications. As for the question regarding the answering of phones in Fort Smith, we do have a public servant in Fort Smith. Again, I can't answer specifically if during 8 to 4 the phones are being answered directly by the Fort Smith office, or if it's going straight into our OCC. But I will be clear that the OCC is providing the information and requests and callbacks out to our detachments on a regular basis, and certainly that I will follow up with regards to the phone being answered on site.
Thank you very much for that, Commanding Officer Zettler. MLA Lafferty.
I'll see you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'd just like to say mostly to the presentation. I do have a couple questions, I guess, on a 20-year agreement, the policing agreement. As Ms. Schofield will know, being a former Minister of Justice, been pushing for detachments in our communities. But to my understanding is that this 20-year agreement, I guess the federal government, the police in the area, did away with establishing more detachment into the community. So, but at the same time, we've noticed some additional policing services. So we can, I guess the Rcmp, through justice and partnership, can provide additional Rcmp officers with our agreement. But at the same time, we still have, I guess, 12 12 communities that do not have detachments. And it's been a struggle. It's been a real challenge. I can speak basically for my community of Gamete. We've been pushing for detachment, but it's not happening. And but I just want to know, Madam Chair, from probably department's perspective, or even from Rcmp Chief Superintendent, is that I understand they can provide additional manpower, but there's no detachments. And some of the communities, I can speak for my community of Gamete in the past, have showed interest in establishing some sort of a detachment facility with partnership through GNWT. I'm just wondering, because federal is not getting involved in that, is there appetite through GNWT, if this was the case, if there was a huge interest from the community leadership to establish some sort of a detachment through partnership? Is that a possibility? Because we should have a detachment in all of our communities, but we don't. Like Nunavut's got all the detachment in all their communities. So is there an appetite through GNWT if we can pursue this? If there's an interest from leadership across the north, would there be an interest? That would be my first question, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily Lafferty. Commanding Officer Zettler, or sorry, we'll start with Ms. Schofield. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we all know, our financial situation right now and going forward is we're not in the best position, and adding detachments and infrastructure can be costly. But I think we are open, and I know we've had, and the minister's had conversations with the leadership of Gamete as well as with you, MLA Lafferty, about moving in an existing detachment when the other one's replaced, and we're looking at those, at assessing the feasibility of that. So I think we're open to discussing with communities a partnership and what that may mean, and whether it's feasible to do that. So I think we are open to that conversation. I can't obviously commit to anything because there would be resources that would be required, and that would have to come from an approved appropriation. So I think we're open to those conversations about what that partnership might be and what the community might want to bring to the table in those discussions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schofield. Mr. McCurk, Commanding Officer Zettler, do you have anything that you'd like to add to that?
No, I think that the ADM answered that question pretty accurately and stuff. There's a cost associated to buildings, infrastructure, but also resources and whatnot. So that's something that would have to have a further conversation and development about. So.
Thank you very much. MLA Lafferty.
Madam Chair. Madam Chair, that was the answer I was expecting. Basically, obviously a departmental answer, but I did meet with R.J. Simpson, and he's open, especially on the Wati old building being transferred to Gamete. It just makes sense. I'm glad the chief superintendent is there to hear it, because it's a huge demand, and we currently don't have any infrastructure in Gamete. We're supposed to have 2 offices there constantly, but they do have residents, but they don't have any for detainment facility. So anyways, I'm certainly hoping that that will be the case. And we have to keep in mind that safety over money, the safety of our people, the wellness of our people. Every time we raise the issue of capital infrastructure, it's an investment. It's not, yes, it takes money, but how many lives do you have to go through before we establish any sort of facility? So I just want to remind the department that this will be an ongoing issue until things are happening. So, Madam Chair, my next question is the 9 positions, First Nation policing. which communities were chosen for these 9 positions. And are there going to be any additional First Nation policing that's up and coming as well? Merci.
Thank you very much, MLA Lafferty. Ms. Schofield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we had existing 4 positions funded under the First Nation policing policy. One was in Betchco, one in Fort Simpson, one in Fort Good Hope, and one in Inuvik. We were able, through additional resources, the federal government came to the table to enhance the funding under the First Nation policing policy. There was an allocation of 35 Rcmp positions that would go to Rcmp policed jurisdictions and across Canada, and we were very successful. I would say we received 5 of that 35. So considering our small population, I thought we did really well. So the allocation of those positions, there was some criteria that the positions could only go to places that had existing FMPP positions. They were not to expand into other communities that were not provided with those services. So we were limited. So the way based on the need and the service levels, 2 positions were going to the Tlicho. So we have 1 position there now, and 2 positions would be going to the Tlicho to service the Tlicho region. 1 would be going to Inuvik, 1 would be going into the Sahtu, and 1 would be going into the Decho. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schofield. MLA Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nunavut is now rolling out their pilot project of body cameras. I think there's been a number of requests for this, both protecting officers and better evidence in court, increasing. Are there any plans to
MLA Johnson, we seem to have lost your connection a little bit there, but I'm going to take a guess and ask that you're asking for the rollout plan for body cams from within G Division. And so I will pass it to Commanding Officer Zettler. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. So yes, body-worn cameras are something that is being looked at. It is something that, again, will come with a cost, as well as trying to ensure that the technology is going to work here in the Northwest Territories. So I can tell you that there is a commitment to move forward with this project. It is an engagement that is happening with the Department of Justice in the Northwest Territories and Public Safety through the Contract Management Committee. The project in Nunavut, or the pilot project in Nunavut, is occurring, and I think that they are able to provide some feedback moving forward over the next little bit to determine what type of equipment may be appropriate and may not be appropriate, and some of the challenges that they're seeing already with the equipment that they have. I would suggest that it's going to be some time before it happens. Just working through the request for proposal, and then of course the procurement process, as well as working with the cost, the potential costs that may impact the territory.
Thank you very much, Commanding Officer Zettler. Ms. Schofield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have meetings next week with the Contract Management Committee, and body-worn cameras is on the agenda. As you're all aware, the federal government announced funding for that. So I believe the plan is that they would fund the rollout, and then the ongoing kind of operations of that would be the responsibility of provinces and territories as they support the RCMP. It is preliminary. There's policy issues around this, storage issues and security as well. So all that is underway. And as the commanding officer indicated, it being piloted in Nunavut has good for us because several things have been highlighted on the initial rollout. The fact that it's dark for a large percentage of our winter months, and so light is an issue on the film quality. Battery life is another issue based on the cold weather. So they're working through that, and it will be dependent on what type of equipment is being used. They are also only rolled it out on a limited basis, I believe, in Iqaluit, so it hasn't been rolled out in any of the smaller communities. So, and it's only been operational, I think, since November. So, yeah. So, as the commanding officer indicated, it might be a while before we see this, but it is a priority for the Prime Minister, as he has announced funding for that. So, we'll see how how the policy development and the procurement processes happen. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schofield. Emily Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hopefully my internet manages to hold up here. Yeah, I look forward to seeing the rollout of body cameras and committee being appraised of how that timeline's looking. I guess another issue where I believe there's a bit of a policy gap between corrections and RCMP right now, and the system is overholding. And I know in a number of our communities, and even Yellowknife in the past, RCMP attachments started operating as de facto warming shelters. Sometimes someone would be on the street and get picked up for public intoxication, and then they'd spend the night in cells, and we'd release them, no charges. And we're seeing more and more case law saying that's unconstitutional. Seeing more and more case law saying that RCMP, when they know they're going to release someone, have to process those release conditions as soon as possible. But I think there's a bit of a culture of holding people and kind of trying to de-escalate the situation. And I'm just curious whether the detachment has a policy on how long they can hold someone without charges, how long they can hold someone after they know they're going to be released, because I think there's a bit of a disconnect, and we're starting to use cells longer than we should. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Emily Johnson. Commanding Officer Zettler.
So I think that I had mentioned in some of my comments during my briefing that there is several warming centers that have expanded beyond Yellowknife. Inuvik, Big Choco, Hay River, I believe, has one. There's some other ones that they are working with communities on and stuff. So again, we recognize, and in some ways I want to think that the RCMP may have spurred some of this movement forward here in the territories over the last number of years to see the sobering center and what established across the territory, Yellowknife primarily. So again, our employees want to take care of people and stuff, and when we are looking at weather conditions of the -40s and stuff and whatnot, I don't think it's prudent to release people into the night when they don't have a safe place to go. By law, we are allowed to detain somebody up to 24 hours before charges or approval through justice and whatnot. I don't think we do that very often, so I don't. We try, and I see it on a regular basis any briefing notes and our documentation on our files where our employees out there trying to find places for people that may be intoxicated and not causing problems to go outside. But again, it's trying to find that location where they're going to be safe. And that includes being safe from the elements and stuff. As for, and I think there was a comment with regards to holding of people post-charge and whatnot. Again, we try to move our people that are with us and have been under remand or something like that in a timely manner and stuff. That's sometimes a challenge, and when I say that, again, half of our communities are fly-in only. Trying to get aircrafts in to get people out on remand and stuff is a challenge. Specifically now, as in COVID, with limited flights into communities, it adds another challenge to it. We do have an aircraft that we utilize as much as possible, but every time we put that aircraft in the air, it adds on to flight hours, which means more maintenance, which means also downtime as we do that maintenance. So there's all those things that come into play, as well as our pilots have to follow the regulations of pilots, so they can only fly so many hours a day, so many hours a week, so many hours a month, etc., etc. So there's all those things that come into play on that and stuff. And again, when we have, as we've seen in the past sometimes, where court appearances are ordered in person, getting people out to Fort Smith, for instance, for our female clients, may not allow us to get a flight down and then back within a timely manner to make that appearance. So I'm not sure if I answer that completely for you, but there's many challenges, and we certainly are cognizant of that, and certainly never want to hold anybody any longer than we can.
Thank you very much, Commanding Officer Zettler. MLA Knockleby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I just wanted to go back to the deficit in the recruitment area that you mentioned, that you're getting. There's a concern that you're not going to be able to bring it, I think you said, up to full speed, the depot. So I guess my question is, or I would assume then that will lead to more people being brought in from outside the territory, potentially. So I guess my question is, do we do the RCMP training, recruitment and training here in the territory, or do we send our recruits to the south? And I probably should have known this ahead of time. Thanks.
Thank you very much, MLA Knockleby. Commanding Officer Zettler.
So currently, Depot and Regina is the only place that we do full training of our employees, and that's from the hiring a new person straight through. We have, as I mentioned, looked at the experienced police officer lateral entry, where people that are working for a designated police force are allowed to do an entry into the RCMP without going to Regina and Depot and stuff. I will also state that we have looked at and are looking at trying to bring applicants in from other training facilities, whether it be the Atlantic Police College, etc., as well as the one in Quebec that I apologize, I don't know the name off the top of my head on, but potentially applicants there coming directly into the organization after doing their training at those facilities and engaging with us at that level. I will clarify that when I'm talking about the training process in Regina having cadets coming out, that's the impact that replacing our any additional resources, as well as across the country. We are looking at, on the federal side, some alternate opportunities to bring people into the organization, not so much as gun carrying officers, but as civilian investigators, analysts and stuff like that, that previously a lot of those roles may have been filled by our regular members and stuff. So.
Thank you very much, Commanding Officer Zettler. MLA Knockleby.
So if there's sort of like an action plan around or a succession planning document or process that you use, is it possible for us as committee to maybe have a look at that? Thank you.
Thank you, Emily Knockleby. Commanding Officer Zettler.
So I'm not going to say that there might be an action plan document out there. It's part of our recruitment process that we have that we continue to look at. You may see some of that information that you're looking for on the Vision 150 tracker on our website as it looks at our people.
Thank you very much, Commanding Officer Zettler. Ms. Schofield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe I could provide a little bit of summary, I guess, of how it works. So the people that are recruited from the Northwest Territories don't all come back to the Northwest Territories. So they recruited, they go to depot, and once they graduate from their troop, it's about a 6-month, I think, training process, they get to choose where they would like to go. So they could go to any location in Canada where there is an opening for them to go. So the territories, because we're small, is when a new recruit graduates from depot, they have a field component, and so they have, I guess I would say, they get a mentor and they shadow when they're out in the field. And those, when they come back to the territory, if they choose to come here, they have to be, we don't put a new recruit into Sax Harbor. So they come to the larger centers for that field training, and then moved around once they've finished that side of it. So, but in the territories, we're given a little bit of a priority because we're a small population, and if we have a member that's moved or transferred to another location, it has an impact. So there's a commitment nationally that the territories are treated specially, I guess. We don't get all new recruits. We also get what we call credits from other jurisdictions. So BC, for example, might get more recruits than us, and we get kind of a credit for a seasoned police officer to be coming. So it's a movement process. So it's a big process that goes through. So it's not a specific staffing kind of plan for the Northwest Territories. It's kind of a bigger process. The Rcmp identify the demand, what we're going to need for future, for any growth or attrition. So members that are leaving because they don't stay in the Northwest Territories for their whole career, they have the opportunity to move around depending on promotions or where they might want to go. So I hope that helps a little bit. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schofield. I believe Emily Knockleby has another question.
Just a very quick follow-up. I'm just curious to know, do you have an idea of how many recruits from the Northwest Territories return to the Northwest Territories? Because for me, it seems that's our ideal, right, is to have the homegrown people come back because they're going to understand our communities better.
Thank you very much, Ms. Emily Knockleby, Commanding Officer Zettler.
Sorry, I apologize for jumping the queue there and stuff. So the majority do come back. So they do. We see lots that come back. They do 6-7 years here. They head south. They do 5 years and they come back to the territory after that. Or we see them that depart at the onset of the career to another province or territory. They get that experience and then they come back at 6 or 7 years process. I would suggest the majority of recruits that leave, that come out of the territories, that sometimes serve back in the territories.
Thank you very much, Commanding Officer Zettler. Members, does anybody else have any additional questions at this time? Seeing and hearing none, I might quickly ask 2 questions. My first question is in regards to, I guess, training. I was really happy to see the piece on cultural awareness. Having grown up in the Northwest Territories, the honesty of Canada's history is something that is taught in Northwest Territories curriculum, but it's not taught right across Canada, and it's really important for officers to understand Canada's honest history. But there's a difference between knowing Canada's history and then understanding how our actions impact people that were serving and people that we're helping. And so you're seeing right across Canada a lot more effort being placed in trauma-informed care. And so I'd like to know what G Division does with officers that come to the North, especially if they're not from the North, as far as training with trauma-informed care. Thank you.
Sure. So I can tell you that a couple of things. One, trauma-informed approach training. We have an online course that the RCMP staff, all staff, is required to take. Again, that is one that I'm proud to say the Northwest Territories employees are, for compliance, are probably the highest across the country in any division. On top of that, we've had people come up and do presentations and seminars regarding trauma-informed to our employees at various training opportunities that we have. And we've also engaged with some of our territorial partners and some of the training that they've taken. So we have multiple approaches to it. Again, it's one of those areas that we will continue to evolve and move forward, and the training's only going to get better from where it started off on.
Thank you very much for that, Commanding Officer Zettler. I appreciate that. My next question is in P funding. And I mean, this is especially different in communities that have a larger RCMP presence. And I mean, I have a lot of friends that happen to be RCMP officers, and I know that there are a large number of people who are very passionate about their job, and I appreciate that. What I am hearing from some community members and also some officers themselves is that increasing police presence, especially in a community like Yellowknife, might not be kind of that, for lack of a better term, silver bullet that we're looking for as far as community wellness, and that the RCMP might actually need more support services in the field helping them do the work that they do, as far as community support services that focus on community wellness. And so I'm wondering if you're able to speak to kind of the lessons learned, or what G Division feels like they need support of or support from within our communities in order to increase community wellness. Thank you.
So that's kind of tricky comment or question when I say that. So I think, you know, and certainly over the last number of years, and we've the last year specifically, we've seen some movements on defunding police. So we have, and you know, making sure that and potentially moving some of that funding towards housing, mental health strategies and initiatives and stuff. And again, I'm not going to argue any of those points. Wellness is across the board, and it's a multi-agency concern. One thing that I will say is that you know, when we talk about defunding policing, we need to have something to take those calls for service before we take away from policing, because if it's not there, police are still going to get those calls for service. Specifically in the Northwest Territories, we have a 24-hour line that's answered. I know 911 does as well, but again, in many communities, as we've heard, there's not the resources, infrastructure there to support some of the other programs 24/7. So a lot of that comes back to the policing to at least do the initial response to. I would suggest that you know, we need to, as a whole, and government of the territories, including our communities and NGOs, look at what opportunities there are out there for different levels of response to mental health calls. Again, I am not saying that we want to be sending somebody from health to an armed and barricaded person. but as we've seen some of the positives with regards to the sobering center and whatnot, with the reduction in calls and lodging of prisoners and ourselves here in Yellowknife, that has really benefited tremendously to allow police officers to do which some people feel may be more their mandate to deal with. So I think mental health is one when we talk about the homeless and concerns that come forward on a regular basis with regards to panhandling and stuff. I think there's an area that can work, and I think again that comes back into a little bit of mental health. So it does. I can look at other areas that we may have, there may be other solutions out there surrounding search and rescue and stuff. Again, when we have people that are missing, specifically in the communities and on the land, community members are way better equipped to support some of those things and trying to come up with processes to support that. Again, I think the Rcmp is an important partner there to help organize and stuff, but if you have a community that has 3 or 4 regular members they're not going to be able to go out there and search a vast area for people and still provide the policing services in the community that we're expecting and stuff. So those are a couple areas that on the top of my head that I can see that we can work in. Again, I think the Rcmp is an important partner on this, and I think it's working not only with justice but some of the other territorial departments that we need to work on. And I look at COVID-19, what a great response by all of the territory departments on that. The onset there, departments providing support at the borders and stuff, moving forward with health, seeing the great rollout of the vaccination process and stuff like that. Again, no one department is running that. It's a rural work amongst everybody to ensure this safety of the communities and stuff. So.
Thank you very much for that, and I appreciate that, and I want to be very clear that I fully respect the work of yourself and your officers, but I truly believe that it's a collaborative approach to community wellness, and that the safety of residents is not squarely on the Rcmp. And I think the more that we can have candid discussions like this about how, us going into a budget session and how we can make sure that you're supported in communities is really important. One of the members who wasn't able to be on the call asked me to pass along a question for them, and their question was in regards to drug trafficking in smaller communities. And it's definitely something that from our colleagues we have heard that it seems to be somewhat more visible in communities, especially throughout COVID. But from a community standpoint, a smaller community standpoint especially, where everybody sees one another, everybody knows one another, and quite often everybody knows one another's stories. And there is a concern that if somebody is identified as being involved in drug trade, that person is not necessarily apprehended and removed from a smaller community, and just understanding how that works and why somebody may not be arrested, and I might be using the wrong terms, I'm very sorry, is arrested in a community and charged with that. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to that, especially for our members who do serve smaller communities and jurisdictions. Thank you. So
certainly, and again, we have to understand that the Rcmp, even if we arrest somebody for drug trafficking, do not have the authorities to remove somebody from that community. So we don't. We have abilities to charge people with offenses under the Controlled Drug and Substance Act and whatnot. Drug investigations are are difficult. And, you know, I say this on a regular basis. I want to think that my employees are not, the people consuming the illegal substance, and B, selling it. And so we really need people in the communities to come forward and provide information that is timely, accurate, but then we also need them to be in a position to provide evidence in court if it goes to that level. And that's difficult in small communities. When we're talking about families and friends and people that have known each other for the whole time. So there's a challenge there on the investigational side. I can tell you that over my 30 years of policing, I've served in lots of small communities. And I continue to say, provide us with information, because it may not look like we're doing something right at that moment, but that may be the piece of information that gives us the grounds to get there. And that's an important aspect on it. Certainly, there's a strong debate across the country and the world about decriminalization of drugs and whatnot. And again, that's not for me to make commentary on. I don't create laws. I work within the laws. But we certainly do need to ensure that any investigations we are doing follow what the current case law, legislation, authorities are. We don't have the ability to enter houses without warrants. And certainly I do not want to see any of my employees or any police officer across the country actually utilize authorities that have come forward via the public health to enter residences for criminal, because that's not going to stand the test of time and actually is going to damage those authorities that public health has put out there. So it is a challenge for us. We do lots of work. We continue to see drug seizures in the larger communities, and I will make the comment, any drug we take out of Yellowknife and Nuvik, Hay River, stuff, stops that drug from going into the smaller communities. So it is. So there's challenges on it. We are working on it. We have strategies that are out there in various regions that are working on projects, but we will continue to have some challenges, especially in small communities, just because of that tightness and whatnot. So.
Thank you very much, Commanding Officer Zettler. Ms. Schofield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to, I mean, enforcement is one side of the drugs, and supplies or demand is the other one. So we need to go back to your comment about community wellness and how do we make our communities well, or kind of reduce the dependency on drugs as well. So there's that important aspect, and I think by working together and in partnership, and communities working in partnership, I think to find some strategies and some services that will work in those communities to help individuals that have addictions or substance abuse issues. So I think that is an important thing, and I mean, we often hear that the police aren't doing enough, but a lot of their work is behind the scenes on stuff like that. As you see, in lots of cases, there's undercover type activities that are done. It's hard in small communities because everybody knows who everybody is, and they know all the Rcmp officers, and then they know all the, if somebody new comes to town, they're aware of that too. So it's, and it is difficult for community members to be that witness on a stand if it's a relative of theirs or a friend of theirs. So those are some of the challenges that the Rcmp have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schofield. MLA Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I recognize it's not the Rcmp's position to write laws, it's legislators, so I'll just weigh in here. I think decriminalization is long overdue, and taking a Portuguese model, you've actually seen that prosecutions go up for trafficking, because you just can build the trust with addicts. Addicts will actually talk to the police if they know there's no fear of arrest. But I know there's consistently calls to do more about drugs in small communities, but in the history of looking at G Division, I think we spend a very large amount of resources on here, and these undercover investigations and drug investigations are not cheap. I was hoping that I could get some statistics on how much of the policing contract is spent on enforcing drugs. And I'd also like an understanding, some of these larger investigations, I think sometimes do not come directly out of G Division. They're federal investigation units. Can I just get some clarification on that? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, MLA Johnson. Commanding Officer Zettler.
Sure. So I certainly would not be able to provide you with the percentage of our budget that's associated to drug investigations off the top of my head. And to be quite frank, I'm not even sure if I'd be able to pull that together with time. But you are correct. Not all of the drug work, and again, I would suggest the majority of the major significant drug investigations that we do in this territory are funded by the federal policing unit here, which comes out of a different funding mechanism. As ADM Schofield had mentioned at the onset there, we have a unit here that does that. That's funded 100% by the federal government. Certainly, we work with our territorial resources to support that unit. And again, those investigations usually start at a territorial level that are bumped up because of the work that's done by our territorial units.
Thank you very much, Commanding Officer Zettler. MLA Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, and I guess if we are going to fight the war on drugs in the territory, I'm more than happy to do it with 100% federal dollars. So I'm just a general comment. I guess my other concern is that I think G Division really is in a bit of a trust deficit. Just the history of Rcmp in the North and a legacy of colonialism, and I think we've seen this in rural and remote communities. I recognize it's hard to staff those positions, but I think a very common belief across the North is that, G Division in our rural and remote communities are where we put officers with disciplinary history. We just recently removed an officer who had previously been charged with sex assault from the NWT. And it's where we put rookies. And I know that G Division struggles sometimes to get police to go to these small rural and remote communities. But I'm wondering if there's any statistics, either for G Division specifically or the Rcmp larger, about whether that is actually true, that our smaller, more remote regions have a higher proportion of rookie officers and a higher proportion of officers with disciplinary records. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, MLA Johnson. Commanding Officer Zettler.
So I certainly will dispute that comment. So I will. I can tell you that, again, our employees that come into the territory, overall, we may get between 8 to 11 cadets a year that come into the Northwest Territories, and they're spanned across the 12-month period. Again, as ADM Schofield mentioned, none of them go to our small communities. They will not go. We will not place anybody into a community that is less than a sergeant detachment. And again, we look at the restrictions on that sergeant's detachment, what's there and there to support. I would suggest that our level of service as an organization has decreased, but that's mainly because across the country we've seen an increased number of resources being brought in. I think in the last number of years we've increased our establishment alone in this division by probably 6 or 7 regular members, and I'm looking at the ADM here for support on that, but it has been a number of positions that we've increased. So the length of our member service might be getting younger, and when I say younger in service years, but it's not because there's more rookies coming in. Again, not into the small communities. G Division is still a place that we get interest from this, our southern divisions to provide resources to, and they come up, they do a great job. There is some challenges without doubt, and I don't think anybody will doubt me when you have people that are bringing families that may have high school year children. They may not be able to go into some of the more isolated communities and stuff, but we do see some of our people that their children have gone or left the house, and they come in later in their careers. Again, it's not full of inexperienced police officers, so it's not. As for the disciplinary area, we don't have a higher percentage of people with discipline, and I would challenge that we probably have a lower level of people with discipline. The comment you made about our member that came into the division with a criminal record. So again, and I spoke about this yesterday when I spoke at the Dene Nation, you know, we transfer about 30 people into the territory per year, and I dropped the ball on that one and stuff. We have since put in some other areas to make sure that for the scrutiny of applicants come in, but we get great members. We get great members that come into the territory. They're well trained. They do a great job. And I'm sorry if I missed any other questions or not.
Thank you very much for that, Ms. Schofield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to add, when individuals are choosing to come to the North, there's a double check. There's some requirements. They do some further review. There's medical type stuff because they're going into small communities where there's not a lot of services. So there's those double checks. They make sure that they understand the remoteness, what services are available there, what services aren't available there. So I think in doing that additional vetting, I think we get some wonderful people that want to live in remote communities and work with people there. And we've seen a lot of excellent extracurricular activities. We have members and their families that go above and beyond in those communities, doing things that that really aren't RCMP's responsibility, and their wives and their partners are there to support them and to participate in the community. So I think we're lucky because we get a lot of very special people in our communities, and then we get them. They come here, they go back, and they come back. Commanding Officer Zettler was here a couple of times, I think, and has chosen to come back and be our commanding officer, and we have lots of officers like that. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schofield. Commanding Officer Zettler.
Sorry, I just realized, I think a part of the question was with regards to the surveys and confidence of the community members in the police. I do want to share that there is surveys out there that externally done to not only the contract partners but community governments as well as the citizens across the country. There's one actually happening right now, and it's done on a yearly basis. And the Northwest Territories, the RCMP, and the trust and confidence in the police in the Northwest Territories is usually on the higher end compared to other places across the country. So that's a very positive thing, and you know, I can say, and I've shared this with the ADM on this, that we look at those surveys, we see where we need to do some work, and we work towards that in future and stuff. I can also say that the last survey we had within internally for public servants and RCMP employees, again, the Northwest Territories ranked highest across the organization for satisfaction of their work, confidence, and engagement. So that's positive comments.
Thank you very much. Members, are there any additional questions today? Seeing none. Oh, Emily Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I could go all day, and I don't want to, completely get into the conversation about policing culture. So how about an easy one? Is it possible to put the vulnerable sector check online? I've been struggling to get time to get into the Rcmp and get a vulnerable sector check, and I know a number of jurisdictions have done criminal record checks online. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, MLA Johnson. Commanding Officer Zettler.
So I'm going to turn to my criminal operations officer at the back there to make a comment about that. I know that he's been engaged in that discussion.
Chair, colleagues, and the question. So the key question is there's two types of criminal records checks. One's often referred to the vulnerable sector. That will require a fingerprinting session. And the purpose of that is a unique risk that exists for folks in special types of service delivery. It's unlikely that the fingerprinting can be waived. Only in a sort of extraordinary circumstance. Somebody might have to be traveling outside the country or some type of really high-risk situation. We might be able to look at some type of interim step. But the fingerprint is a key part of making sure that, again, a risk towards a youth or somebody that's that we've seen victimized in the past is done. A standard criminal records checks, you can receive the form in the time of COVID-19 electronically from the local detachment, and you can send it back. But at the same time, you will have to pick it up and show appropriate ID to pick it up.
Thank you very much for that, Emily Johnson. It looks like you're going to have to make some time. So on that note, I don't think there are any additional questions, but I wanted to say thank you very much for joining us here today. I know that we kept you probably a little longer than we committed to, but we really appreciate you making the time for us today. Thank you. No, we have to go back in camera. So